So out of my offcuts tray, I tend to keep offcuts like this. They're of some size. I don't keep every little piece of steel. I'm not some sort of weird hoarder. That's a lie, I am. This piece here, there's a notch here, which is factory built. It's to allow the upright, that section there, that's rusted off many, many years ago and been cut off. So I need to line up with that. Then what I'm going to do is, it's quite a wasteful job making these sections, so what I'm going to do is line up with that. All the time I'm touching this offcut, this section I've cut off the bed, I'm trying to be really careful not to distort and destroy the shape. That's on there now. I'm going to draw around there. Yeah, that is definitely a dint in there. That I suspected was a dint before. But you should be able to see that now on the camera, that if you look here, I'm hoping you can see it, if you look here, it's all a dent. It's concave, so that's definitely wrong. That should be a more gradual of a cut. So what I'll do now is I'll bob that out and cut it on the guillotine. Then I will cut inside it a decent seam there, a decent lip, about that sort of size. Oops. This is an awful lot easier on a bench. About that sort of size. Okay, and I will cut that with the angle grinder and shape it to fit, because obviously we want that correct. I'll do that now, come back, and then I'll start gluing it. What I'm going to do now is, with the angle grinder, I'm just going to shape that. Now this is becoming a former or a die really, so this shape needs to be really, really good on here. So, oops. I tend to use an old disc. These discs, somebody once made a joke, I can't remember if I read it on Facebook or something, but this made a joke of flat discs never actually wear away, they just go down and down and down in gritness. These start as 60s. What you find is on edges like this, it flicks material up, and I can't see very well through my glasses. I would recommend you use some and get some new ones, but I haven't got any, so I don't like to use my driving glasses because I have an eye issue that means they'll cost like 700 quid. So what I do is just carefully by hand shape that now into a nice steady radii. Check it against the original piece, check it against this piece that I've cut off and make sure it's the right shape. So I'm just going to shape that up. Right, so I'm happy with the fit of that. I'm choosing to smooth the bottom edge. There is a step in it. I'm going to lose that step, and that'll become apparent later on. But what I'm going to do now, because I'm so happy with that shape, is I'm going to actually transfer this to another piece of steel that I can then put into that, so I know that these two shapes will match perfectly. That piece will have flattened out as the weight went onto it, sorry. But if I can cut that now, it saves faffing about later on. It's just ready to glue in, and I can shape that then to match this, which this fits beautifully to that, to this piece. That is absolutely bang on now. I'm really, really pleased with that. Oops, he says, famous last words. Difficult to show you on the camera, but it is a really, really nice fit all the way along that edge. As I say, I'm going to trim that down the edge and leave about ½ an inch as per my line, but I'm not doing that straight away. So I'll just transfer this to something else. You don't need to see me do that. I'll do that, cut it out, then the two pieces are ready to go in for when they're spot welded together. I've come outside to show you this, so it's a little bit lighter. My neighbours all think I'm nuts anyway, probably, so there's no problem there. So if you can see the edge there, I've put the edge level with the edge of the material that I was shaping. The only reason for that is because that shape was so good, I wanted to follow it all the way down. And what I've done is, starting at the very, very top there, put a spot weld on there. Now that's quite a high current weld. If I turn it over, you can see it's burnt a little dot inside. Now you need that. That is critically important. when you're doing this sort of work, if you're doing it on a car or anything where you can't get to weld up the inside. Now I can get to weld up the inside of this, and I will probably do that. If you want a large radius, I always do that. Then it allows you to grind it back, because otherwise when you're grinding back through these welds on the outside, you'll cut through it and break it free. But as I've done that, I've manipulated it about 1 inch at a time, just to make sure the fit was absolutely spot on to that edge. And as you can see, it follows it really nicely. The only place it's a little tiny bit different is there, where I believe when I traced it there was a dent in the material, so I've done away with that. Don't attempt to weld it at each end or leave a massive gap and then adjust it. You need to weld it. So I did that first weld here, then adjusted it to there, then adjusted that little bit there where the swage line is. Got a spot on it there. You'll see that that spot is above the bottom of the swage, so I could use that then as a little bit of a fulcrum to pull the metal about. I didn't just do it with my fingers and thumbs. I used a series of chisels and hammers and things to carefully work that together. And then I've worked down 1 inch, get it right again, make sure the radius is appearing correct, clamp it together as best you can. I've had to hold it with my thumbs. Be careful when you do that, obviously it burns you to death. And what I've done is I've tacked it and tacked it and tacked it and tacked it until I've got to the end. I've left the corner there. That's no biggie. That won't move anyway. So that now follows that shape beautifully, and as you can see, it's away. So this is the first section of it. So what I'll do is I'll weld down the outside first. I'm on just over half current with that. You want a good quick spot. When I start continuous welding it, what I'll do is I'll turn the welder down a little bit, because obviously once I get a flow going, I won't need to, the heat will be in the material. And as I stated in my exhaust building video, if you saw that, once the heat's in the material, obviously you hypothetically need less current. So you need to sort of keep it moving and start on a slightly lower current. It will need a tiny bit more grinding at the top there when I start, but I don't want to be burning through, and it will start and flow and leave a nice continuous weld. I will be grinding that back to leave a nice radius on there to match the original. It's not a big radius on there, it's quite a tight one. But this radius here, if that's a big radius, a very large radius, then obviously I would definitely weld up the inside, and then you can grind back through your weld without cutting the material in half again. So I'll set you up and you can watch me weld that up. It may or may not be pretty, let's see. So yeah, you should be able to see that now. That's like a continuous weld. Obviously I use the dot 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 technique. Again, reading the material. If you see it starting to, you know, the heat starting to spread out significantly, slow down, stop, take a sec, leave a little bit longer between your dot dot dots. You've got to sort of read the material as you're going along. As you can see, that's quite a neat weld. It's quite continuous. I did that. The spots were done on a setting 1 below where I am now. No idea how many amps it is, I couldn't tell you. And as I've said before, you would need it different probably for your machine. Now, if I turn that over, yet again it's hotter than the sun, so it's got, as you can see, it's got a chain of spots through there. Now some of them, you can see where I started obviously with the lower current, and some places it hasn't burnt through as well as others. Probably I was going faster there. Just zoom you out a tiny bit. So what I'm going to do now is weld up the inside. I'm going to make sure that that flange is square to the repair piece, because obviously that's important that it is before I do that. If I weld both sides, once I've done that, I won't be able to square it up. So I'll do that now. I'll just bob over to the vise. You don't need to see me doing that. And just dress it with a hammer. And then I'll burn through that, and I will put that on the next current setting, because an internal fillet joint like that needs more current to weld it anyway. It's already welded, so the material is now thicker. Some of that is now up to about 1/8 of an inch thick, or 3.2mm thick, so I can now hit that with a lot more temperature. Okie dokie. Not entirely sure, I think I forgot to start the video in there when I welded that. Belted around that nice and quickly. As you can see, makes a nice neat weld if you work reasonably quickly all the way across there, moving on about 1mm at a time. Dot, 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 splodge, 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 about 1mm or so at a time. I think that gives you that sort of stack of quarters effect. That's a really nice continuous weld. There are no pinholes in there. I stopped there. You can see that little bit of impurity there, excuse me. That's because the bench set on fire. So I slowed down a little bit there. I figured the heat was getting, but the heat is, as you look at that blue line down there, you can see the heat was quite continuous and quite isolated as well. So that's made a nice job. This is obviously really, really, really hot at the moment, so I'll need to let that cool a little bit, and then I'll try it into the section and against the piece I was making originally. You've constantly got to keep trying stuff in. The old adage about measuring twice, cut once, really, really evident on this. You try to make it fit to what's there already. It's got to look the same as it was, so I need to keep making sure everything's right. So yeah, keep checking, keep checking, keep checking. Unfortunately, it takes longer, but it does a better job, which you then don't have to bodge up with seam sealer and anti-stone chip and things like that afterwards. You just end up with a nice, good quality, strong, correct job. So, okie dokie. Someone once said to me, how do you work with all them tools around you all the time? Don't you fall over them and trip over and stuff like that? Do you know what I do? But I tend to be using all those tools, so that mess is unfortunately kind of necessary. Also, if you see something possibly on TV, shows where they've got these beautiful polished marble-esque floors, and they go, oh, we restore cars, or oh, we fix cars, we modify them, we customise them. Yeah, if the workshop doesn't look like this, I don't know if they're working hard or hardly working, I don't know which it is, but trust me, I try to keep this place as clean as I can and look at the state of it just from doing this, you know. Anywho, back to the job in hand. I've now finished welding that. I've put a tightish radius on there around the edges. I did my nice stack of quarters weld on the inside there, as you can see. Looks beautiful, nice continuous weld. I've also taken the liberty of putting this piece in there. Now what I forgot when I started was this is like a galvanised zinc sort of coating on there. It's hateful stuff. So I've cleaned this back. I ground the edge off here with the angle grinder. Just took the flap disc and removed it until it was flush. I put this against it nice and square. It follows the edge lovely. And I've just done my dot 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 welding down there. Same setting as I did with the other piece. You've got to be a little bit careful because obviously this material has got some rust in it, and if you've got a thin bit then you might have to put some more welding like I did here. It was a little tiny bit thin there, but I've welded back into the, you know, I've ground that bit out, welded back into the good metal. Don't cover up rust with metal. Don't weld a piece over the top of this and think, nah, it'll be right, you know. Get rid of that rust. If you leave it in there, it'll just come back. This now needs radiusing off. I've welded up the back edge as well, which you can't see, and quite honestly it's a nightmare trying to turn these over, so I'm not going to show you that until I get under there to spot weld. But now I've taken this edge off and used this as a pattern, as a template to weld to, and I've taken this corner out because it was all rotten, and what I'm going to do is build a piece along here, a nice long section that will now tie into this shape. The shape is now there. That's setting my shape for this wing. It's not really a wing, it's a bedside. Now, I'm not going to set that in exactly right, but as you can see there, that fits pretty blooming well. Obviously, you don't want to seam weld along there. There's a slight radius on both pieces, so what I'll do is spot weld up the inside with the MIG welder, The shape is pretty excellent. It fits really nicely. There will be a little bit of hammering and dollying and faffing about with it as it goes in, but the shape follows that contour really, really well. I'm really pleased with that. Obviously this is the easy bit. The curved pieces in the next section are not quite so easy, and I don't know how I'm going to do that yet. I do tend to think these things through for quite a long time before I actually take to it with the welder, and quite often I'll do it a different way in the end anyway. The job does dictate it. It's quite funny when you give somebody a price for a job, you see that look on the face like, how much? It's just a little hole, and then you say, well, you know, it's a much bigger job when you get into it. It always inevitably is. It's never going to be pretty when you start cutting away. Luckily I could see most of the rot in this, but anyway. Right, so I will now grind a nice radius onto that with my flap disc. There are little bits here, you can see I've cut a little too far here. There's a little bit here where I've ground back a little further than I needed to. Not bothered about that, I'll weld those up afterwards. I may do a seam weld all the way down this edge here when the two pieces are together, and then grind that back rather than having to try and feed, because these have obviously been glued together in the past, spotted and glued at the same time. I don't have a spot welder, I have to do it with the MIG, so I may actually I may seam weld down it and then put the groove back in so it appears how it is now. It'll be right on the inside, but the outside will look different. It'll look right, but it actually will be welded up solid. Give it a little more strength in here, because these are really, really floppy and horrible. So, right, I shall grind that back and then come back to you in a second. Hopefully you can see that now. Put a radius on here. Let me just pick you up and zoom you across a little. I'll put a radius on the edge of here. As you should be able to see, it's quite difficult when it's all shining. I've ground that weld back all the way, trying not to damage the parent material. Now, the parent material has dents and bumps all over it anyway. It is going to need some filler. Inevitably, everything always does. So the next job I'm going to do now is, having tried this in, and that's fitting really rather well now. Obviously that's going to need clamping together before I weld anything. What I'm going to do now, because of the location of this, I want to spot weld down here. So I'm going to spot weld, zoom you out again. So I'm going to punch holes in this panel. Then that gives me access to weld from that way, okay, from inside the truck bed. If I did it that way, although it'd look nice and neat, I wouldn't be able to grind those welds back on the inside, and you'd be able to see that they've been done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my joddling tool, which also has a hole puncher on it, and I'm just going to punch those. I tend to try and do them a little bit randomly, around 1 inch. Every 25 millipeppers, or whichever you'd like to use, inches or millimeters. But I tend to try and do them a little bit like they would be done in the factory, so hit one, miss one sort of thing. I'm going to pop it all the way down, even though I aren't actually attaching this just yet. This part is, some of this is going to get cut out when I do the rust on the bottom there. But of course, once I've welded this piece in, I'm not going to weld to this yet, but I will weld all the way down it, where it's welded in fully. So I'm probably not making any sense there, but I'm going to pop it now so I can get to do the holes without having to try and drill them afterwards. So I'll set you up so you can see what I'm doing. Hopefully. So the joddling tool has, it's already set to the hole punch, so it has a little punch there. It's about 6 mil. 6.5 mil. Some people like to punch a bigger hole, some less. It's going to be quite difficult because I put that fillet in. I probably should have done this first. Yeah, that ain't going to work, I don't think. No, it's just going to do it on the edge. So what I'll do is, I'll set the drill up and I'll do those with the drill. And then it's ready to spot weld. I can get clamped together and get it all fitted and set, and then I'll just put some tacks on it. And then that's going to be it for me for today in here. And I'll continue the video tomorrow because it's getting quite dark outside because it's late. Okie doke. So I've got that clamped in. I'll try and show you there. It's very correct in this corner here. And along here, I haven't clamped it yet, purely because this is just flappy, so it doesn't really matter. But the shape is correct and it's following this edge here. It's really difficult to see. I will, before I spot weld it, I will nip all these gaps up. You want it as nipped up as possible. Now, normally I would have, there's a big dint there which I'll have to dress once I've got this tacked in. I'm going to tack it here. I'm going to tack it here, so I'll tack it here. Behind the clamps there. I'm going to put a tack on here. I'll move that clamp along, so I have one of these clamps unfortunately. And then what I'll do is I'll clamp it down here and put plenty of clamps on here and get this a good fit, and then I will weld across here so it doesn't move across this seam here, continual seam. Normally I'd do this a dot and then leave it to cool. On this panel it's so far out of shape, it really isn't going to make a huge amount of difference. I'll try and take my time, I won't rush it, but it's it really is, obviously it's been a builder's truck, so it's led an incredibly hard life. So, you know, trying to keep it perfect is difficult when the rest of it is all out of kilter. You can see I've got a small overlap here. I've just put a bit of a bend on there, so that sits almost flat. Once it's ground back, it'll just look like a tiny ripple in the panel. And this piece here is notched, so I can seam weld along there, and that's a butt weld with a small gap, so I know I'm getting good penetration on my weld. This corner is set. I'm going to tack it in there first, here, and I'll do that now. Okay, so if you could see that, I've just put a small tack on that corner. I'm now going to move my clamp along. I'm going along, what, 15 mil, sort of 5/8 of an inch, and I'm going to start with weld here. I'm going to put a spot here. Adjacent to my clamp, okay? I'm going to weld this end, so I want those two absolutely buttered together like that, nice and tight on the grips, so that is a solid line there. And I'm going to put a couple of spots down the edge of there. There is no gap whatsoever, which is what makes this welding easier. So I'm going to put about a gap, probably about every ½ inch. You can probably tell I'm using quite a lot of current, so I'm just doing a short dab with the welder. I find that's better than trying to use low current, and then it tends to burn holes because you have to wait longer for the weld to form and roll out. And hopefully that's held that in place. It has, obviously I know what I'm doing. So I'm just going to try and get a tack on that corner now. Now, I've left a small gap at the end. That's so I don't have a weld burn through and make a mess of that corner there. So, that is now held in place here. All this section is correct, but I do need to put my clamps on here. But what I'm going to do is fully weld this first. I'm a Ford man through and through, which is probably explains why I look so old from having to fix them all the time. But what I will say about this is this original steel actually welds really nice for the condition it's in. So as I'm talking to you, what I'm actually doing is letting the panel cool a little bit. The smoke that you see, that's coming from the seam seal and under seal that's around this section. So I'm just going to weld this up now. So that's now welded. I'm quite content that that's got no air gaps in. You can see the seam sealer burning away. Turn the welder off for you. I'm not going to grind that back yet. I'm going to clamp all this together all the way down so all these gaps are gone. As you can see where the clamps are, it's pulled the gap together. And then I'll roll it over and I'll start the spot welds. So if you can see that, what I've done is I've put 4 clamps on about 6 inch of material. Now, that might look ridiculous to some of you, and it looked ridiculous to me the first time I was told to do it. However, you want it as tight together and as how you want it when it's finished as possible. So I'm just going to close these gaps up now. There's just a few tiny little gaps where the holes are. I've drilled them a little larger than I normally would. Which is my bad really. They're a good fit. You want, oops, but absolutely, that's fine actually, it's come off but it doesn't matter. You want absolutely no gaps there whatsoever. The seam is tight for many reasons. One, that's how it should be. Two, you know, Ford didn't leave the factory with loose gaps. So what I'm going to now do is crank the welder up. I've been doing these on about a number 3. I'm going up to a number 5. Yet again, your welder will be different to mine, so don't take that as verbatim of what it is. And I'm going to roll that into there. A nice, good, hopefully a concave spot weld. Now, it's a bit of a funny angle and I'm trying not to ruin the panel by kneeling in it. It's got enough damage without me making it any worse. So, I'm going to try and do it from here and you should be able to see me all being well. Assuming I've started the camera. I have. So, I'm going to do this in a continuous weld, starting from where I welded previously here, up across. You'll see the spots start to grow, hopefully. When you see it fill the hole, stop. Okay, so that's the first spot weld. Hopefully you can see that. Probably not. What I'll do is, I'll do all the others. And then what I'll do is I'll zoom you in so you can see them. That one's good now, so don't need the clamp there even if it was still on. The next one I'm going to dress a little. Make sure there's no gap again. Again, start from the bottom. The material is thickest there, so the welder will roll out of there and you can see it grow. Now, I haven't quite finished the hole there, so I'm going to do that as 2 parts. It'll take a little more grinding back, but it won't matter. I can see that the weld is on the other side. Give it a tap with the hammer. As it contracts, it will draw the metal together. Take off the next clamp, if I can get it off. Super tight. And the next one. I'll put this one back on now. Try and keep those as tight together as I physically can. Okay, So I'm just going to bob that back on, try not to sever my wrist again. Did that once on the car when I was working on it. Slip my wrist on the floor of the Spitfire. Trust me, you don't want to do that either. I'm just going to give that a tap. They're a pretty good fit, but unfortunately I drilled the holes just ever so slightly too large. I picked up the wrong drill bit. Once you've done one, you may as well do them all. So they're bigger spot welds than I would normally do. However, it does allow a greater penetration on the metal, so I don't overly mind if I'm really honest. I could, of course, have just seam welded down the edge of that. I may do that afterwards anyway. Depends how I feel on the day. That's the half hole that I made with the hole punch, and I'm not going to go any further with that now because the rest of it needs to move that ever so slightly. That will need to be clamped back up when I make the next section inside. So I'll just pull you off the tripod, turn the welder off, and you can see those welds before I grind them back. There you go, those are the spot welds. Now you'll hear a lot of people saying, well, nobody's ever going to see them. I still have to grind those back. I can't leave those there. I'm also going to weld this section up here solid. It's good thick material, it's just where I've cut and ground it away. I'll weld that back solid so nobody ever knows I've even been there, and then I'll grind that back to carry on the form. And then I'll run the flat disc down the edge of here just to neaten up those edges and keep them nice and parallel and smooth together. Always do that, makes a much better finished job. So I will grind those spot welds back, and then that's probably it for me today. It's pretty dingy out there and it's raining, so always a good time to realise you've left your windows open. So I'll grind these back and show you what it looks like afterwards. See that now. Sorry, it's a bit shaky on the old camera there. I've ground those back with the edge of a thick cutting disc. No, that's not what they're designed for, but yes, they do work. Sources for courses, you may not be able to do that. I've also put a radius on that bottom section now, so that with a smear of sealer on there, you won't ever know it was welded. It's a nice gentle radius. I'm being careful because obviously there's still sharp bits on it. I've evened up this edge here. I need to do some work up here and I need to do some work here, so I'm not spending a lot of time on that part, but just to show you really that I've done that, and that's now a decent fit. Now if I can turn the wing over without destroying everything in my workshop. See, it's pulled those gaps in. You can see where I've put the spot welds. You can see the heat distortion there, the heat bluing, sorry. Obviously that'll just come off, that's just a discoloration. But you've now got a good repair there. There's a little weld here needed. And as I say, if there's any larger gaps like here, this still doesn't have a spot weld in it, so I haven't pulled that in yet. But pulling it together there has made a nice even seam along there. That weld will grind back flat. You won't even know it's there. This weld, I'll cut the ridge back in, and what I'll do is I'll put a small weld here just to fill that little gap there. You can see there's a gap there where I've ground out a little too much, and that will then I'll just run a cutting disc down the edge of that just to make sure that that gap looks correct. But yeah, so far so good.